Back on the record after afternoon recess. We're in the presence of the jury. Mr. Bahena is present along with the attorneys of record. Ms. Scott, I want to remind you, you're still under oath. Mr. Brown, you may continue with your direct examination.
Thank you, Judge. Just prior to the break, Ms. Scott, you had given us some information concerning a statistical comparison that you have to make in DNA analysis. Is that correct?
Yes.
In terms of the blood that was on the napkin that was taken from the home of Cristhian Bahena Rivera, in plain terms, that high of a statistical number means what?
It matched.
Okay. So it's his DNA profile that's on the napkin, correct?
Yes, his profile matched that profile.
All right. And were there other items in this particular case that matched the known profile of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about one of those, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to put State's Exhibit 46 on. Okay?
Okay.
We've had testimony that a swab was collected from this area, State's Exhibit 46, by Amy Johnson. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And Amy Johnson is a coworker of yours?
Yes.
Okay. Have you worked crime scenes with her on occasion?
Yes.
All right. The swab of this area that is right here is on the trunk seal. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
All right. And that swab that she collected, was that submitted to you for DNA analysis?
Yes.
This swab was taken from the Chevy Malibu belonging to Cristhian Rivera. Would you agree?
Yes.
Were you able to obtain a DNA profile from the swab on the trunk seal that we see here in State's Exhibit 46?
Yes.
And were you able to compare that DNA profile with the known profile of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
What were the results of that analysis?
So the screening test indicated the presence of blood on those swabs, and the DNA profile that I developed matched the known DNA profile of Mollie Tibbetts.
And is there a statistical number also associated with that that you were able to utilize?
Yes.
And what is that?
The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 8.2 nonillion.
I don't think nonillion is a word that we normally use, correct?
No.
All right. How many? That's a lot of zeros.
It's
correct?
a lot of zeros. Yes.
All right. A very large number.
Yes.
That's why you're able to say that the swab that was taken in Exhibit 40, or the swab that was taken from the blood stain in Exhibit 46, matches that of Mollie Tibbetts' known DNA.
Yes, the profile that I had for Mollie Tibbetts and the profile I developed from that blood matched, and exactly the same.
Okay. Before we move on, you had mentioned to me at break that you also had utilized another item that was taken in this case in order to develop the known DNA profile of Mollie Tibbetts. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what was that?
There's toenails taken at autopsy.
Okay, and those were provided to you?
Yes.
And you were able to develop a profile off of those toenails?
Yes.
And those were the known profile of Mollie Tibbetts?
Yes.
All right. Again, that known profile is something that you compare to an unknown profile that you develop in any case, correct?
Correct.
All right. That's the way it works.
Yes.
All right. Before we move on to further testing that was done on the trunk liner, were there other items that were taken from the black Malibu that you attempted a DNA analysis on, specifically 2 stains off of the visor?
Yes.
And what were the results of that analysis? Your item 65.
65, yes. Screening test did not indicate the presence of blood on 2 stains on the visor. A screening test did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid in 1 additional stain on the visor or in 3 stains on the fabric from the ceiling that was submitted.
So essentially all the screening tests were negative.
Yes.
And then there were 2 areas on a football that was taken from the car.
Yes.
And what were the results of that DNA analysis?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on those 2 areas. The DNA factors that were detected were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
So you can't compare what you found on the football to anything.
Correct.
Although you can tell it was human blood.
Yes.
All right.
It was human DNA, yes.
I'm sorry, human DNA. And then there were 2 stains on the fishing pole that were taken from the trunk of the Malibu.
Yes.
And before we move on, State's Exhibit 43, there's a fishing pole in this vehicle, is that correct? Where my cursor is, that's what that looks like to you?
Yes.
Okay. And the results of your testing and analysis with regard to anything that would, the stains that would have been on the fishing pole?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on 2 stains on the fishing pole. The DNA factors detected and a sample taken from the handle of the fishing pole were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
All right. And then lastly, there was a metal pipe that was found in the trunk, is that correct?
I believe so.
All right, and did you attempt any DNA analysis on the metal pipe that was located in the trunk of the black Chevy Malibu?
No.
And why not?
I did not see any stains on that metal pipe.
Okay. All right. Ms. Scott, were there several items that were sent back to you after your initial testing for DNA in this case? Were there several items that were sent back to you for analysis?
Yes.
What was sent to you?
The pieces of the fabric covered floor or liner from this trunk in the Malibu.
Okay, and we're looking here at State's Exhibit 43. Do you see that?
Yes.
Were the liners that we see here in the trunk of the black Malibu in State's Exhibit 43, were those the liners that were sent back to you for analysis?
Yes.
Okay. And that was done at my request. Is that true?
Yes.
All right. Sometimes we ask you to look further, right?
Frequently.
Okay. All right. Were those liners removed from the trunk prior to your analysis?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's previously been admitted as State's Exhibit 49. Is this the trunk liner from the black Chevy Malibu?
Yes.
And obviously it's out of the trunk in State's Exhibit 49. What perspective is this, if you know?
I believe this is standing where you'd be if you were on the outside of the trunk looking in.
Okay. At the back of the vehicle?
Yes.
Okay. And then State's Exhibit. It's not coming up. Yep. State's Exhibit 50. What is this a photo of? That's already been admitted.
This would be from like the back seat looking out.
Okay. So this area would be where the trunk would close at the rear of the vehicle. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. Now I see in these 2 photos, 49 again on the screen, 50 on the screen. There are white stickers that we see on the trunk liner. Do you see those?
Yes.
What do those represent?
Those are the areas that I sampled for DNA analysis.
Okay. And whenever you sample an item like a trunk liner, how is it that you get access to any particular area so you can analyze it for the presence of DNA?
So in this case, if at all possible, I take a cutting from that area. So I actually remove a piece of that material to test.
And how many different locations are there in the trunk of this trunk liner that you tested?
Let's see. Really was 9.
Okay. And did you screen each of these areas for the presence of human blood?
For blood, yes.
Okay, and how many different locations screened positive for human blood?
There was 4 areas on the trunk floor liner. There was 3 areas on what I called the second trunk side liner. 1 area on the top of the trunk liner. And 1 area on the trunk door liner.
Okay. Now, of all of those locations, we see some of them here in State's Exhibit 50, correct?
Yes,
And was there one particular area where you were able to develop enough of a profile in order to make a comparison?
yes,
Were the rest of the stains that you observed in the on the trunk liner too weak for comparison?
yes.
This is State's Exhibit 51. And does this picture show the area where you were able to develop a profile suitable for comparison?
Yes.
And where is it located?
It's about in the middle of this picture.
Is it near where the tail light would be?
Yes,
I'm going to put my cursor just below an area. Is that the location?
yes,
All right. Do you assign it a number at the laboratory?
yes.
And what is that?
This one I called sample 59.3.
And again, that's the location that we see here on the photo, correct?
Yes.
Do you write it on a, how do you mark this area? What do you do?
These are stickers that are called tough tags, and that's what I wrote, the case number, the sample number, and then the date and initials that I examined it on.
So when you have to go back and testify about something, you know exactly what you did and what area you tested.
Yes,
Just above this sticker, it appears that there's a hole in the trunk liner. Who did that?
I did.
Okay, is that the cutting that you took?
Yes,
Okay. And were you able to develop a profile from this particular area of the trunk that you were able to match to a known profile in this case?
yes.
Okay, and can you describe that analysis, please?
So the profile that I developed indicated a mixture of 3 individuals. I was able to determine a partial profile at 20 out of the 21 locations that I tested of the major contributor, and that was consistent with the known DNA profile of Mollie Tibbetts.
Okay, is there a statistical probability that's associated with that?
Yes,
And what is that?
that would be less than 1 out of 2.1 non-million.
Okay, so another very large number, correct?
Yes.
And in very basic terms, what does that mean with regard to the cutting that you took that we see here in State's Exhibit 51?
At the 20 locations, I was able to determine a major profile. It matched Mollie Tibbetts at those 20 locations.
So Mollie Tibbetts' blood is in the trunk of the Malibu. Is that a safe conclusion?
The screening tests at that area indicated the presence of blood, yes.
All right. And one more photo I'd like to take a look at is the State's Exhibit 52. Does it show that location even closer?
Yes,
And here we can actually see the number 59.3, correct?
yes,
And the area that you cut that you matched to Mollie Tibbetts?
yes.
At this time, I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Defense may cross-examine.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just where you want to be Friday at 3 o'clock, right?
Of course, where else?
Me too. Is it Agent Scott or Ms. Scott?
Miss Scott.
Ms. Scott, thank you. Now, could you give me just a little bit more of your educational background in the area of DNA?
Beyond the degree,
Your degree again, what is it?
it's a Bachelor of Science in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven in West Haven, Connecticut.
And what is a forensic science degree?
So the forensic science, you can choose at that school, you can choose your emphasis in either biology or chemistry, and I chose my emphasis in biology.
And what other training or education do you have in the area of DNA testing?
So I've attended multiple trainings over the years, like I said, at least one per year, in areas like screening tests, in mixture interpretation,
Could that be repeated for the interpreter?
screening tests and mixture interpretation.
Mixture?
Mixture. Yeah.
Have you written any papers, authored any treatises, anything like that?
No,
And all your training and experience has been in the area of law enforcement?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
All your training has come from law enforcement?
It's come from people that work in labs, so not all law enforcement, no.
But has it been provided by law enforcement?
It's been paid for by law enforcement.
And all your testimony you've given has been by and for law enforcement?
Yes.
Okay. Have you ever worked privately?
No.
Okay. Ma'am, I want to kind of walk you through this chronologically because you were pretty involved in the investigation of the death of Mollie Tibbetts, correct?
You could say that.
Okay. You were first called, you were called out on July 20th by Trent Villada. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
And feel free to follow along in your reports, okay? Now, when you were called out on July 20th, you were called for a missing persons investigation. Am I right on that?
Yes.
And your assignment initially was to go to the home at 622 West Des Moines Street in Brooklyn, Iowa, correct?
Correct?
And again, you went there and just kind of looked for evidence of foul play, perhaps, right?
Yes.
And as you went through there, you noted and seized a number of items. One thing I noticed from your report is that you noted a gun safe in the home. You recall that?
Yes.
Did you look through the gun safe?
Yes.
Did you see guns in that safe?
Yes.
How many guns did you see in that safe?
In the gun safe, there were 13 long guns.
Okay. Any handguns?
There was a hanging wooden shelf case that contained a .357 revolver.
Okay. But in the gun safe itself, there were no handguns?
I do not believe so, no.
There were also other items in that safe that caught your attention, right?
In the hanging wood shelf case, yes.
Okay, so there were a number of knives that you saw, right?
Correct.
And where were they?
They were in the hanging wooden shelf case.
Okay, so to the side of the gun case was a hanging wood shelf case kind of on the wall in the hallway, right?
Yes.
And hanging from that hanging wood shelf case was a loaded .357 revolver.
It was in that thing, not hanging from it, yes.
Okay. Inside the hanging shelf case is a loaded pistol, right?
Correct.
Is it secured and locked?
I don't believe so, no.
And inside that case with the loaded .357 revolver are a number of knives, right?
Yes.
How many knives did you see?
I'll have to look and see if I noted.
Go right ahead.
We did not note the number of knives.
Okay, your report says several knives. Can you give me an estimate?
I'd have to look at a picture to give you an estimate. I don't recall.
Do you recall if it was more than 5?
I don't.
What kind of knives were these? Do you recall?
No,
Were they hunting knives, kitchen knives, pocket knives?
they would have been of like a kitchen or hunting variety, not kitchen, but hunting or folding.
Okay, so knives that perhaps like sporting knives or hunting knives. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And why'd you take note of the firearms and the knives?
Because we didn't know what had happened at that point. We have no clue, so we don't know what will be important later.
Okay. Now, you also went ahead and collected a number of like cans and bottles and some buckle swabs, right?
Correct.
One of the cans and bottles you talked about were the purple and teal water bottle we talked about, right?
Yes.
There was also a Dr. Pepper can that was taken from the bedroom, right?
Yes.
You also got buckle swabs from Mollie Tibbetts' mother and her 2 brothers. What was the purpose of that?
So we didn't know if we would be able to get the father at the time, so we got those to make comparisons to Mollie, to what we thought was probably Mollie's DNA, to see if she could be eliminated or included as a relative of them.
Did you ever get the DNA of anyone else that lived at 622 West Des Moines Street?
No.
Why not?
No one sent it in, and we didn't request it.
Why'd you not request it?
I'm not in charge of the investigation, and I didn't know if there was any relevance to it. The closest I come to requesting stuff like that usually is putting it in the report that if there is additional knowns submitted, I can make comparisons.
Is it fair to say that you were never asked to make any comparisons to anyone connected to Mollie Tibbetts other than someone in her immediate family?
No, I did not receive anything else to make comparisons to, correct?
So you never were asked to compare or make a sample from Blake Jack, Allie Houghton, or Dalton Jack, the other 3 members of that home, right?
Correct.
You eventually went ahead and did some testing on those items that you ended up seizing from the home at 622 West Des Moines Street, correct?
Yes.
And you documented those in another report that I think is dated, I always lose the dates on these reports, I'm sorry.
Upper right-hand corner.
8/21/18, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, item number 3 was the water bottle. We now know as Mollie Tibbetts' bottle, right?
Yes.
Item number 4, that's the Dr. Pepper can. And you tested that for DNA, right?
Yes.
And tell us what we learned from the DNA testing on the Dr. Pepper can.
The DNA profile that I developed from a swabbing of the mouth of the Dr. Pepper can indicated a mixture of 2 individuals. The profile of a major male contributor was determined. I call that profile male A.
Okay. What steps were taken, if any, to determine who the person we call male A was?
I did not receive any other knowns to determine who that was.
Okay. So explain this to me. You're there looking at a crime scene. She's a missing person. At this point, when you're testing this stuff, do we know if she's deceased or not?
Not at this point, no.
Okay. So at this point, she's still missing, right?
Yes.
And the possibility of her being abducted from that home is a very real possibility, correct?
Yes.
And we have unknown DNA on a item of evidence from her home, and you weren't asked to test that?
I didn't receive anything to anybody else's knowns to compare to it, no.
Okay. Did you tell anybody that you had unknown male DNA in Mollie Tibbetts' bedroom, essentially, on an item taken from that bedroom on the day she disappeared?
It's in this report. I think that's as far as I did for notifying.
Who'd you give this report to?
This is put on a website and is available to the county attorneys and the law enforcement agency.
Okay. And then item number 5 is the the Arizona can, that's the Arnold Palmer, right?
Yes.
And again, you had a mixture of Mollie Tibbetts, partial profile, right?
Yes.
And then male A shows up again, right?
Yes.
And no one asked you to test any further, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, on your report number 2, there's items that go from 11 through, I'm going to go 21, a number of hairs, and then a container containing a possible fingernail. You see those?
Yes.
Who seized those hairs and the fingernail?
I don't know who sees them. They were submitted by the Powashik County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. You don't know where they come from?
I believe those were from a Nissan Altima.
Okay. Now, none of those items in 11 through 20 indicated any presence of Mollie Tibbetts' DNA, right?
So there was only one that I was able to do our testing on, and that one was not her. The rest of them were not suitable for nuclear DNA testing.
Okay. And then we move on farther to the items that are listed at 32, 33, 34, and 35. I'm going to work backwards there. 35 is a sealed envelope containing rubber gloves. Where did those come from?
Double check my notes here.
Please do.
The only thing I have noted, they were in an envelope that was addressed to Powashik County Sheriff's Office. So I don't know where they came from.
Okay. No DNA on those.
The DNA was too weak.
Okay. Item 33 are the black shorts. Now, that's where you first tested for seminal fluid, right?
Yes, I've tested those screened those for seminal fluid.
And who asked you to screen those for seminal fluid?
I looked at them, and I was asked to look at them for DNA analysis, and I looked at, so depending on what the stains looked like, that's how I determined which screening test to do.
Okay. And those were submitted on July 26, 2018. So those were located before Mollie Tibbetts was located, right?
Yes,
Okay. So those we don't know if have any connection to this case at all, right?
correct.
The true involvement you really had in this case was after Mollie Tibbetts was located. Is that a fair assessment?
For the DNA, yes.
Yes. Your involvement then became the DNA testing of the items submitted to you, right?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about DNA a little bit with the jury, because DNA always kind of blows your mind when you use these words like nonillion and megazillion or whatever, okay, right?
Right.
To be fair, it takes very little substance to get these really big numbers, right?
You have, I'm not sure how to answer that.
DNA is very small,
Yes.
very, very small, right?
Yes.
I mean, I think the picture that Mr. Brown pulled up for you of your cutting in the trunk was probably small as a dime, right?
Smaller, yes.
Yeah, so we're not talking about, when you say 1 out of 8 nonillion, we're not talking about necessarily the size of the sample. It's just DNA is microscopic, right?
Yes, because the DNA I'm testing is inside the nucleus of your cells in your body.
And each person's DNA, unless you have a twin, of course, is unique to that person. More unique than fingerprints, right?
As unique, yes.
Okay. Now, these 21 locations you have, those are broken down into further parts, are they not?
Yes.
And those are called fractions?
At each location of those 21 locations, you have 2 alleles.
Okay. And those alleles, there's one called an epithelial?
That's, you're talking about a differential extraction now.
Okay. So each allele, you have 2 alleles, you have 42 alleles in each DNA cell, right?
That's the 42 locations I'm testing.
Okay.
Or the 21 locations that have 42 alleles, yes. The 21 locations that have 42 alleles.
Okay. So let's look at your report now. Report number 5, dated November 9th of 2018. You first received some left-hand fingernails at item 37, that's the lab number, and the agency number is 01MT. And it goes through item number 40, which includes left-hand fingernails, right-hand fingernails, left foot toenails, and right foot toenails. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now, your report says that no examinations were performed on the fingernails, toenails, or the pulled scalp hair at item 41. Do you see that?
Yes.
But did I hear you say on direct examination that you tested the toenails?
The left toenails, item 39.
It was 39, okay. What was the purpose, to your understanding, of the fingernails being submitted to you?
They were being submitted as a possible known profile of the Jane Doe at the time.
Okay. Is there any way to look at those fingernails and be able to tell if there's any DNA from someone else there?
You could swab them to see if there was DNA from someone else, yes.
Was that ever done?
No.
And DNA, we're sloughing DNA off all the time, aren't we?
Yes, skin cells, yes.
I mean, it's kind of scary. We slough off millions of DNA cells every day, right?
The skin cells that you shed have some DNA in them. They're not always a full DNA profile in every dead skin cell that comes off.
Sure. But even if you don't have a full DNA profile, a partial DNA profile can tell you something, right?
Yes.
I mean, if someone comes by here and swabs a table, they may not be able to say Chad Freeze was sitting here, but they could possibly say a man was sitting here, right?
Possibly.
Okay. Item 42, there were boxes containing 2 swabs, left and right proximal inner thigh. That's agency number M6MT. Now, tell us what those are.
Those were swabs from the inner thighs of what became Mollie Tibbetts later.
All right, so someone, I see here is probably the medical examiner, took swabs of the body of the inner thigh of Mollie Tibbetts, right?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of doing so?
We're looking for any foreign DNA.
And are you telling me that it's still possible after being deceased for a period of time that foreign DNA would still possibly show up on Mollie Tibbetts' thighs?
It's possible.
Okay. And the results of your testing, what did it indicate?
That no profiles were developed from those swabs.
Did any DNA at all foreign to Mollie Tibbetts show up on her body?
From those swabs, I was not even able to get her profile. I had no DNA from those swabs at all.
Okay. At item 49, is described as tape lifts from trunk interior on the black Malibu. What are tape lifts from trunk interior of black Malibu?
They would have taken tape and pressed it against the fabric in the trunk and then submitted that.
For DNA analysis?
looking, usually when they submit tape lifts for DNA, they're looking for hairs.
Okay. Were there any hairs located?
I did not examine that item.
Why not?
I had other items that I looked at, and then I was not requested to go back and test that.
Okay. Item 52 is a pair of black shorts from the cornfield located southeast of the body. You see that?
Yes.
Now, you tested that, correct?
Yes.
And what did you test that for, first of all?
I did a screening test for the presence of seminal fluid, which did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid on 15 areas on those black shorts. And I did DNA testing on one area from the front right leg.
And what was the conclusion?
Then I also did screening tests that were inconclusive for the presence of blood on 2 additional areas on the black shorts, and I attempted DNA on both of those areas, and no profiles were developed from the 3 samples I took from the black shorts.
So these shorts had neither Cristhian Bahena Rivera's blood nor his seminal fluid on them. Is that a fair statement?
They had no DNA profile that I was able to develop.
And who asked you to test those shorts for seminal fluid?
That was based on the information I had in the case and what the stains looked like.
So there were stains on those shorts that looked like seminal fluid could be there?
The stains that could possibly be, that's why I screened them.
Okay. Then also someone in the case file asked to have those tested for seminal fluid?
I don't recall anybody specifically requesting that. I could check the correspondence log. I don't remember anybody specifically requesting seminal fluid.
That's fine. Let's move on.
Okay.
Item 53 talks about a pink fabric band located in the cornfield southeast of the body. Do you see that?
Yes.
Was that tested?
I did not see any stains on that fabric, so I did not perform any testing.
So nothing that looked like blood?
No.
And item 54, you note it to be a piece of striped fabric located in the cornfield southwest of the body. First of all, I want you to describe this piece of striped fabric for me.
Look at my notes. So my description that I wrote in my notes was, it was wadded up when I received it. I unraveled it and it has one end in a triangular shape with an attached band piece. And I noted it was possibly underwear or half of a bra.
Okay. You can't conclusively say if it was underwear
I cannot.
or a bra?
Correct.
And when testing those, I'm assuming you tested those, was there the presence of blood on those?
Yes, it indicated the presence of blood.
If, for sake of argument, if these were a pair of women's underpants, would you necessarily be surprised to find the presence of blood?
Depending on the situation, no.
Okay. Did you also test those for seminal fluid?
I did.
And were any indications of seminal fluid found?
The screening test did not indicate the presence of seminal fluid, and no sperm were microscopically identified in that sample.
And no DNA profile was able to be determined from that?
So no profile was developed from the sperm fraction, and the DNA factors detected in the epithelial fraction were too weak for conclusive interpretation.
So we do not have Cristhian Bahena Rivera's DNA on that piece of evidence?
I cannot include or exclude anybody from that epithelial DNA.
So we cannot include Cristhian Bahena Rivera?
I cannot include or exclude anybody.
The napkin Mr. Brown asked you about, the napkin that had 1 in 26 octillion possibility of being Cristhian Bahena Rivera's blood, that was found in his trailer, right?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. You aren't attaching any significance to that, are you?
It just matched his DNA was on it. That's all I can say about it.
On items 58 through 61, now, your report was authored 11/9/2018. Those are the trunk liners that you talked about that were tested later, right?
Correct.
And that's when Mr. Brown asked for further testing, right?
Yes.
Why on earth were they not tested back in November of 2018?
I tested the swab, which was lab item 68, and I had a profile from that, so I did not do any further testing at that time.
And where'd that swab come from?
That was submitted by the crime scene team.
And did they tell you what they swabbed to get that?
It was listed as stain on lower exterior rubber seal of trunk of black Malibu.
Okay, so we have the stain on the seal, and we go no further? That's the theory?
Once I develop a probative DNA profile, at least to my understanding as a probative profile, I do not continue to test unless requested.
Okay. And nobody from Agent Valletta to anyone else asked you to do any more testing, right?
Well, Scott Brown asked me to later, yes.
Until Mr. Brown did, no one else wanted to do any more investigation, right?
Judge, I
I
might
d-
ask that calls for speculation as to what anyone else would want to do.
Sustained.
No one else asked you to until Mr. Brown did.
I don't believe so.
Okay. And you tested the football and the fishing pole, and those were inconclusive, right?
Yeah, the DNA was too weak to do any inclusions or exclusions on, yes.
All right. So I finally want to talk about these two knives that were seized. The two knives that were seized, did you physically, with your eyes, examine them for blood? The folding knife and the black utility knife?
Referring to my notes to make sure I'm accurate. Yes, I just visually examine those.
Any sign of blood?
So the lab item 70, the Kershaw Speed Safe brand knife, I noticed that there were reddish discolorations on the E in Kershaw on the blade and on the side of the handle where the knife folds. Both of those screen negative for the presence of blood. And the tip of the sharp edge of the knife also screened negative for the presence of blood.
Okay. So no blood in that knife.
Not where I screened anyway, no.
Did you take the knife apart?
No.
How about the other knife?
So the other one I listed as a Stanley brand silver and black utility knife. There were reddish discolorations on both sides of the blade. And they screened negative for the presence of blood.
Okay. And tell the jury, it does not take very much blood to test positive, does it?
No,
I mean, a minute amount.
very small.
Okay. So when it tests presumptively negative for blood, that's a pretty good conclusion, isn't it?
It's as good as the screening tests are, yes.
And your standards within the State Division of Criminal Investigation, your lab, if it's presumptively negative, you go no further.
Generally, no, I do not.
Okay. So let's move on to the final report. We're a year ahead now. Mr. Brown has asked you to do some more testing. So you test more onto the trunk liner. And you take that little piece and you test that, right?
Yes,
Okay, so we have four areas, items 58, 59, 60, and 61, right?
yes.
Okay, let's start with item 58. There were three areas on that trunk floor liner that had no blood.
The screening test did not indicate the presence of blood on 3 areas, correct?
Okay. So your report talks about DNA testing was attempted on 4 areas, 58-1 through 58-4. So the 4th area did have some blood.
No, there is 2 sentences in that first one, so there was 3 areas
Okay.
that screened negative for blood, and then there was 4 additional areas that screened positive for blood that I tested.
Okay. And in those 4 areas, what'd you learn?
The profile that I developed from each of them indicated a mixture of 2 individuals that was too weak and complex for conclusive interpretation.
So we have a mixture of 2 people's DNA,
Yes,
and likely at least one of them's blood, right?
yes.
And you can tell nothing from this mixture?
I cannot include or exclude anybody from those mixtures, no.
You can't exclude Cristhian Bahena Rivera from that?
I cannot include or exclude.
Why not?
Because the DNA that is, we have standards to make sure that we are not interpreting stuff that is too weak and making false inclusions or exclusions. So when it's not strong enough to sample, I say it's too weak and complex. And with this being a mixture also, it might be because there's different levels of DNA that are not clear which one's like a major and minor contributor that I'm able to determine in other cases.
So what's the standard? What's the threshold? Tell me that, as to when I can say perhaps any conclusion can be reached. Is it male? Is it female? Is it Christian? Is it not?
So to determine, we generally right now use, we have to have at least 8 locations, and we have 2 different thresholds. And the one that's called a stochastic threshold, where if there is 2 different peaks at that location, then you should see that the other peak is there if you're over that stochastic threshold. If you don't have at least 8 locations that have 2 peaks that you consider like the major in that case, or above the stochastic threshold, then we say that it's too weak and complex, or too weak that we can't do any interpretation on it.
So how many indicators were in this mixture? Can you tell me?
I can look. So in 58-1, I have at least 1 allele at every location of the 21 tested. However, most of them are barely above what is our analytical threshold, where we can reliably detect whether or not a peak is present or not. And at some of those locations, their peak height balance is off, which it could indicate that there is either degradation or it might be multiple contributors at that location. There's 3 locations where I have 3 alleles to indicate I have at least 2 people in this mixture, and they're both very weak.
Okay. So you're comfortable, though, saying there's at least 2 individuals there?
Yes.
Can you tell me if either one of those individuals is a female?
Let me refer to the... I'm looking at what is the quant value that estimates the amount of DNA in the sample. So for 50,
One of the witnesses locating that, could I have you approach, please? We'll take one more recess, take a 10-minute recess, and then we'll come back and finish up. Just want to remind you of your admonition. Please leave the notebooks where they are, and you're free to leave at this time. And Ms. Scott, again, you can step down.